The mining station 442 hummed with the constant drone of extraction equipment, its metal corridors filled with the acrid smell of processed ore and sweat. Captain Sarah walked through the facility's lower levels, her boots echoing against the grated floors as she conducted her monthly inspection. As the human representative for the Galactic Mining Consortium, she'd seen her share of questionable practices across dozens of worlds, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover in the restricted breeding facility. The mining corporation had always been secretive about their operations. Their scaled, reptilian features and cold amber eyes made most species uncomfortable, but their efficiency in extracting rare minerals was unmatched across the galaxy. What Sarah didn't know was the dark secret behind their success. They had enslaved one of the last remaining celestial dragons to power their operations. As Sarah descended into the facility's deepest level, a section marked "Authorized Personnel Only," she heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a sound somewhere between a whimper and a roar, filled with such profound sadness that it seemed to echo through her very bones. The sound was coming from behind a massive, reinforced door marked with warning symbols. Sarah's translator device struggled with the complex harmonics, but she could make out fragments. "Please, no more, I cannot." The pain. The voice was ancient, melodic despite its anguish, and undeniably intelligent. Sarah had heard enough alien languages to recognize intelligence when she heard it, and this was no mere animal. She checked her scanner for heat signatures and nearly dropped the device. The readings showed a life form of enormous size, but more importantly, the energy output was off the charts. Whatever was behind that door was generating enough power to run half the station. Sarah's mind raced as she pieced together the implications. Using her administrative override codes, Sarah bypassed the door's security system. The massive portal groaned open, revealing a chamber that her expectations. Instead of the sterile mining equipment she'd expected, she found herself in what could only be described as a torture chamber designed for a being of immense proportions. The dragon was magnificent and heartbreaking all at once. Her scales, which should have shimmered like liquid starlight, were dull and from countless procedures. She was easily the size of an ancient earth whale, but her body was emaciated, held in place by energy restraints that pulsed with cruel efficiency. Tubes and cables ran from her body to massive processing units that hummed with stolen energy. But what truly horrified Sarah was the evidence of the dragon's forced reproduction. Around the chamber, she could see the remnants of destroyed eggs, their shells bearing the distinctive silver patterns that marked them as female. They had been forcing the dragon to lay eggs, then destroying any that would hatch female offspring, keeping only the males for some unknown purpose. The dragon's great head turned toward Sarah, and their eyes met. Those eyes held intelligence older than human civilization, and in them Sarah saw recognition, hope, and a plea that transcended species barriers. The dragon spoke, her voice a whisper that nonetheless filled the chamber with harmonic resonance. "Human," the dragon said, her words carefully chosen in standard galactic despite her obvious pain. "I am of the celestial realm. I have been bound to this place for 47 of your years. They force me to create life only to destroy it when it does not suit their purposes. My daughters, all my daughters." Sarah felt rage building in her chest like a fusion reactor going critical. "How many?" she asked quietly. 312 female eggs destroyed," replied, her voice breaking. "They keep the males alive long enough to harvest their flame glands for fuel, then they dispose of them as well. I am the last of my kind, and they are ensuring I will remain so." The enormity of the genocide hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had stumbled upon not just slavery, but the systematic extinction of an entire species. They were using not just for her energy, but breeding her specifically to harvest biological components from her offspring before killing them. "The males they keep alive," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fury. "Where are they?" Gestured weakly with one wing toward a smaller door Sarah hadn't noticed. 7 remain. They are broken. They have devices that cause pain whenever they attempt to use their natural abilities. They are taught only to suffer." Sarah approached the dragon slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. As she got closer, she could see the full extent of the abuse. Chemical burns marked where injections had been made, surgical scars showed where tissue had been harvested, and the energy restraints had worn deep grooves in scales. "Why haven't you fought back?" Sarah asked. Your people were known across the galaxy as the most powerful beings in existence. His laugh was bitter. They have my children, human. Every time I resist, they kill one of my sons. Every time I refuse to lay eggs, they increase the pain amplifiers. I have chosen a slow death over watching my children die quickly. Sarah knelt beside the great dragon's head, placing her hand gently on the scales. They were warm despite everything, and she could feel the incredible life force that still burned within despite decades of torture. "My name is Sarah," she said firmly. "I'm a human, and I'm going to get you out of here." Studied her with ancient eyes. "Humans," she said slowly. "I remember when your species first reached the stars, so young, so fierce, but you are one and they are many, that will kill us both." Sarah stood and began examining the restraint system, her engineering background allowing her to understand the basic principles even if the technology was foreign. "Maybe," she said as she worked. "But humans have a saying, nobody gets left behind. And another one, sometimes you have to burn the whole system down to save what matters." She pulled out her communicator and began recording everything she saw. The evidence would be crucial, but more immediately, she needed to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with. As she documented the torture devices and harvesting equipment, her anger crystallized into cold determination. She said as she worked, "I need you to tell me everything. How many run this facility? What are their security measures? Where are your sons being held? I need to know what we're up against." The dragon began to speak, her voice growing stronger as hope rekindled in her ancient heart. She told Sarah about the facility's layout, about the 12 overseers who managed her captivity, about the automated systems that monitored her every breath. She described the smaller chamber where her 7 surviving sons were kept, drugged and restrained, their spirits broken by years of conditioning. As spoke, Sarah's mind was already working on a plan. She couldn't fight them directly, but she didn't need to. Humans had always been better at finding unexpected solutions, at turning systems against themselves. And Sarah had just found the perfect leverage point. She said when the dragon finished her account, "You said these energy restraints are powered by the station's main grid." "Yes," the dragon confirmed. "They require enormous amounts of power to contain my natural abilities." Sarah smiled grimly. "And you said you've been holding back, not using your full power because they threatened your children." "That is correct. What would happen if all the restraints failed at once, and you decided to stop holding back?" For the first time in 47 years, smiled. It was a terrible and beautiful sight, like watching a star decide to go supernova. The station's shields would not protect them from the void of space. Sarah nodded and began working on the restraint controls. "Then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to free your sons first, then come back for you. When I give the signal, I want you to show these exactly why dragons were feared across the galaxy." As she worked, Sarah could hear movement in the corridors above. They had noticed her absence from her scheduled route. Time was running out, but Sarah had never backed down from impossible odds. She had found something worth fighting for, and she would see it through to the end. The restraints sparked as she bypassed their safety protocols. Gasped as feeling returned to parts of her body that had been numb for decades. It would take time to fully free her, but the process had begun. "Hold on," Sarah whispered to the dragon. "I'm coming back for all of you." As she headed toward the door that led to the chamber holding sons, Sarah prepared to do what humans did best, the impossible. The corridor leading to the chamber housing sons was even more heavily secured than the main breeding facility. Sarah's override codes were being challenged at every turn, but her position as consortium inspector gave her just enough authority to keep moving forward. Her heart pounded as she heard the approaching footsteps of guards echoing through the metal corridors above. The smaller chamber door finally yielded to her persistence, and Sarah stepped inside to find a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. 7 young dragons, each roughly the size of an earth elephant, lay motionless on individual platforms. Their scales, which should have gleamed with the same celestial beauty as their mothers, were a dull bronze color, dulled by drugs and despair. Unlike these dragons showed no signs of physical torture, but the psychological damage was immediately apparent. Neural suppressors covered their heads like crowns of pain, devices specifically designed to cause agony whenever they attempted to access their natural abilities. Their eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing with the hollow gaze of beings whose spirits had been systematically broken. "By the void," Sarah whispered, approaching the nearest platform. The young dragon didn't even react to her presence, though his eyes tracked her movement with mechanical precision. According to the monitoring displays, these dragons had been kept in a state of constant low-level pain for over a decade, long enough to condition them into absolute compliance. Sarah examined the neural suppressors, recognizing them as a more sophisticated version of technology used to control dangerous criminals across the galaxy. But these devices had been modified, turned from restraints into torture instruments. Every time these young dragons tried to fly, breathe fire, or even communicate telepathically with each other, the devices would send waves of excruciating pain through their nervous systems. The part was the conditioning protocol she found in the facility's computer system. They had systematically destroyed every natural instinct these dragons possessed. They had been taught that their own abilities caused pain, that their dragon nature was something to be suppressed. They had been turned into living batteries, conscious but broken. Sarah worked quickly to disable the neural suppressors, starting with the dragon closest to the door. As the device powered down and fell away, the young dragon's eyes suddenly focused, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. He tried to speak but could only manage a whispered croak, his voice unused to forming words. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, moving to the next platform. "I'm here to help, your mother sent me." At the mention of, several of the dragons stirred slightly, some deep part of their consciousness recognizing the connection despite years of conditioning. Sarah continued working, removing each neural suppressor with careful precision. The devices were designed to cause feedback pain if removed incorrectly, and she couldn't risk further damaging these already traumatized beings. As the suppressors came off one by one, the dragons began to show signs of returning awareness. The oldest of them, a dragon whose bronze scales showed faint traces of silver that marked him as firstborn, managed to lift his head and look directly at Sarah. "Human," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why do you help us? You're kind," showed no interest in our fate before. Sarah paused in her work, meeting the dragon's gaze honestly. "Because my kind believes that what's being done to you is wrong, because your mother is magnificent and doesn't deserve what they've done to her, and because sometimes one person has to stand up and say, no more." The dragon studied her face for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. For the first time in a decade, hope flickered in his ancient eyes. "I am Draconis," he said formally. "Son of last of the celestial line, if you truly mean to help us, know that we are not the weak creatures they have made us appear. The pain has taught us control, but it has not destroyed our power." As Sarah removed the final neural suppressor, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The guards had discovered her unauthorized presence in the restricted areas. She could hear their heavy footsteps approaching rapidly, accompanied by the whine of energy weapons charging. "Can you move?" Sarah asked urgently, helping Draconis to his feet. The dragon was unsteady after years of forced immobility, but she could see strength returning to his limbs as the suppressor's influence faded. "We can move," Draconis confirmed, looking toward his brothers. "But we have been conditioned to fear our own power. The moment we attempt to use our abilities, we expect pain. It will take time to overcome years of conditioning." "We don't have time," Sarah said, checking her weapon and scanner. "There are 12 guards heading this way, and they're not going to listen to explanations about human morality." The chamber door burst open, and 3 guards rushed in with weapons raised. Their reptilian features were twisted with anger and confusion as they took in the scene. 7 freed dragons and a human where none should be. "Human," the lead guard hissed, his translator making his words sound even more menacing. "You have violated sacred breeding protocols. The punishment is immediate termination." Sarah stepped protectively in front of the dragons, her own weapon drawn but hopelessly outmatched. "These are sentient beings, not breeding stock. What you're doing here is genocide." This laugh was like grinding stone. "Genocide? We are preserving the species. The males provide valuable biological materials, and the female prevents the expansion of a dangerous population. Celestial dragons were too powerful to be allowed to multiply freely." "Too powerful for what?" Sarah demanded. "Too powerful for you to control." "Too powerful to coexist with civilization," the guard replied coldly. "Their very existence threatens the established order. We have contained the threat while maximizing the benefit. It is efficient." Behind Sarah, she heard Draconis speaking softly to his brothers in the ancient dragon tongue. She couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the power building in the air around them. The young dragons were fighting against decades of conditioning, trying to remember what they truly were. "You will step away from the specimens," the commanded, raising his weapon toward Sarah's head. "And they will return to their restraints. This facility is too valuable to lose because of human sentiment." Sarah looked into the guard's amber eyes and saw the same cold calculation that had allowed him to torture sentient beings for decades. These weren't creatures who could be reasoned with or appealed to. They saw and her children as resources to be exploited, nothing more. "No," Sarah said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. The guard's weapon hummed as it reached full charge, but before he could fire, the temperature in the chamber suddenly spiked. Behind Sarah, Draconis had overcome his conditioning enough to summon a small flame, barely larger than a candle's flicker, but it was the first fire any of these dragons had produced in over a decade. The flame grew brighter as Draconis's brothers joined their power to his. Years of suppressed dragon fire began to build, fed by rage and hope in equal measure. The neural suppressors lay scattered on the floor like discarded shackles, no longer able to cause pain or enforce compliance. "Impossible," the guard whispered, his weapon wavering as he stared at the growing flames. "The conditioning protocols are absolute. They cannot resist." "You underestimated them," Sarah said, feeling the heat building behind her. "And you definitely underestimated what happens when someone gives them hope." The dragon fire erupted in a controlled burst that melted the weapons without harming Sarah. Draconis and his brothers stood together for the first time in years, their eyes blazing with rekindled power and purpose. They were still weak from years of captivity, but they remembered what it meant to be dragons. "Thank you, human Sarah," Draconis said, his voice now carrying harmonics of power that made the chamber's walls vibrate. "You have given us back ourselves. Now we will free our mother." The facility's main alarms were screaming now, and Sarah could hear more guards converging on their position. She activated her communicator and sent an emergency signal to the consortium fleet, knowing it would take hours for help to arrive. They were on their own, 7 weakened dragons, 1 human, and a mother dragon who had been tortured for nearly 5 decades. "We need to reach your mother," Sarah said as they prepared to leave the chamber. "But first, we need to make sure they can't just activate new restraint systems." Draconis smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw the predator that had once made dragons the apex species in the galaxy. "Leave that to us. We may be young and weakened, but we remember our lessons from before the pain. Dragons are very good at destroying things when properly motivated." As they moved toward the main chamber where waited, Sarah realized that she had become part of something much larger than a rescue mission. She was helping to resurrect a species that the galaxy had written off as extinct. They had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that breaking someone's spirit was the same as destroying their essence. They were about to learn why that assumption was wrong. Dragons, it turned out, were very hard to kill permanently. And humans, when they decided something was worth fighting for, were almost impossible to stop. The corridor ahead led to freedom, to justice, and to a reckoning that had been 47 years in the making. The reunion between and her sons was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. As the 7 young dragons entered the main chamber, their mother's ancient eyes blazed with a light that seemed to come from the very heart of a star. The maternal bond that had sustained her through decades of torture suddenly blazed to life with such intensity that the air itself seemed to shimmer. "My children," whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the entire facility vibrate. "My beautiful, brave children." The young dragons surrounded their mother, their scales beginning to shimmer as they drew strength from her presence. Draconis placed his head against its massive neck, and Sarah could see tears flowing freely down his draconic features. "We thought you had forgotten us, Mother," he said softly. "The pain made us forget ourselves, made us forget everything except survival." "I could never forget," replied, her voice growing stronger by the moment. "Every day I endured their tortures, I held on to the knowledge that you lived. Every egg they forced me to lay and then destroyed, I told myself it was so that you 7 might survive." Sarah continued working on the main restraint system while the dragons reconnected. The facility's alarms were growing more frantic, and she could hear the sound of heavy machinery moving throughout the complex. They were activating emergency protocols, probably preparing to flood the chamber with sedative gas or worse. The restraints are almost disabled, Sarah called out, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked. But we're going to have company soon. I count at least 20 guards converging on this level, plus automated defense systems. Turned her great head towards Sarah, and for a moment the human felt the full weight of ancient gratitude and respect. Sarah of Earth, the dragon said formally, you have given me back my children and reminded me what it means to hope. How may we repay this debt? Just get out of here alive, Sarah replied, finally managing to bypass the last of the restraint protocols. All of you, make sure this never happens to anyone else. The energy restraints powered down with a deep thrumming sound that seemed to shake the station's very foundations. For the first time in 47 years, was truly free. She slowly rose to her full height, and Sarah finally understood why dragons had once been considered forces of nature rather than mere creatures. Even weakened by decades of captivity, was magnificent. Her scales rippled with returning power, shifting from dull bronze to brilliant platinum as her natural energies reasserted themselves. Her wings, cramped from long confinement, spread wide enough to span the entire chamber. Most impressive of all were her eyes, no longer dulled by pain but blazing with the accumulated fury of nearly 5 decades. They wanted to see what a dragon could do, said, her voice now carrying the harmonic undertones that could shatter crystal and bend metal. Perhaps it is time to give them a demonstration. The chamber door burst open again, this time admitting the facility's chief overseer along with a full squad of guards armed with heavy weapons. The leader was larger than the others, his scales bearing the scars of many battles and his eyes holding the cold intelligence of someone accustomed to absolute power. Celestial Dragon, he said, speaking directly to with formal ceremony. You will submit to recontainment immediately. Your offspring will return to their restraints. The human will be terminated for interference with essential operations. Looked down at the overseer with the expression of a mountain regarding a grain of sand. Overseer K, she said, and her voice made the very air vibrate with contained power. For 47 years you have tortured me. You have murdered my daughters before they could even hatch. You have broken the minds of my sons and turned them into living batteries, and now you demand that I submit to more of the same. It is efficient, the overseer replied without emotion. Your species was too dangerous to exist freely. We have provided a controlled environment where you can contribute to galactic civilization without posing a threat. A threat to whom? Draconis interjected, his own voice beginning to carry the harmonic undertones of true dragon speech. A threat to your mining profits? A threat to your monopoly on power. The overseer's weapon whined as it charged to maximum power. A threat to the established order. Dragons were apex predators with intelligence and longevity that made them unsuitable for coexistence with younger species. The Galactic Council agreed that controlled preservation was preferable to extinction. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. The Galactic Council knew about this. The Council authorized this facility personally, Kay confirmed. Every major species government receives shares of the energy and biological materials we harvest. The dragons provide more useful resources dead than they ever did alive. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just the act of one corrupt corporation. This was a conspiracy involving the highest levels of galactic government, a systematic genocide disguised as conservation. Every major species in the galaxy had benefited from the torture of the last dragons, and they had all agreed to look the other way. You see, said sadly, reading Sarah's expression, this is why I lost hope. When the entire galaxy agrees that your people are too dangerous to exist, where can you turn for justice? Sarah looked around the chamber at the 7 young dragons, at their mother who had endured decades of torture to keep them alive, at the evidence of systematic murder and exploitation. Then she looked at the overseer who spoke of efficiency and controlled preservation as if he were discussing mining quotas instead of genocide. You turn to someone who doesn't care what the galaxy thinks, Sarah said firmly. Someone who believes that what's right matters more than what's profitable. She activated her emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies, and began speaking directly to the consortium fleet and any ship within range. This is Captain Sarah of the Galactic Mining Consortium. I am declaring this facility to be in violation of fundamental sentient rights. I am formally requesting immediate intervention under Protocol 7 of the Galactic Ethics Charter. The overseer laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Protocol 7 requires evidence of ongoing genocide, human, and the Council will never support dragons over the combined economic interests of every major species. Then the Council is about to learn what happens when humans decide the system needs to change, Sarah replied. She turned to her sons. I can't give you justice through the legal system, it's too corrupt, but I can give you something else. Wood asked. Freedom, Sarah said simply. Real freedom. The chance to rebuild your species somewhere the Council can't touch you, and the knowledge that at least one human thinks you have every right to exist. Studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then slowly began to smile. It was a terrible and beautiful expression, like watching a star decide to go supernova. And how do you propose we achieve this freedom, Sarah? The same way humans have always achieved the impossible, Sarah replied. We break things until the people in charge pay attention. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers across the galaxy for generations. Rose to her full height and breathed dragon fire for the first time in 47 years. Not the small, controlled flames her sons had managed in their escape, but the full fury of a celestial dragon awakened to righteous anger. The fire that erupted from her throat wasn't merely hot, it was the essence of stellar fusion made manifest. The blast carved through the facility's reinforced walls like they were paper, opening the chamber to the void of space beyond. Only the station's emergency force fields kept them from being sucked into vacuum. Draconis and his brothers joined their power to their mothers, their own flames adding to the conflagration that began tearing the facility apart from the inside. Years of suppressed power erupted in a display that reminded the galaxy why dragons had once been revered as living gods. The guards fired their weapons frantically, but dragon scales that had been reinforced by decades of pain were proof against their energy weapons. The dragons moved through the facility like avenging angels, systematically destroying every piece of equipment used to torture and exploit their kind. Sarah followed in their wake, documenting everything with her scanner and communicator. The evidence she was gathering would be crucial for the political battle to come, but more immediately, she was watching the resurrection of a species that the galaxy had written off as extinct. As they reached the facility's docking bay, Sarah activated her override codes one last time, opening the launch bay doors to reveal her small inspection ship floating in the void beyond. It wasn't designed to carry passengers as large as dragons, but it would have to do. The ship is too small, Draconis observed, looking at the cramped cargo hold. Dragons can survive in vacuum for short periods, said thoughtfully. We can fly alongside the ship until we reach a safe harbor. Where? Sarah asked. The Council has jurisdiction everywhere in civilized space. Smiled, and this time there was something ancient and dangerous in her expression. Not everywhere, Sarah. There are worlds beyond the rim, places where the Council's authority has never reached, places where dragons once ruled before we grew too trusting of younger species. As they prepared to depart, the facility's overseer and his remaining guards made one last desperate attempt to stop them. Kay appeared in the docking bay with a weapon Sarah had never seen before, something that hummed with dark energy and seemed to bend space around itself. Dragon Killer, said quietly, recognizing the weapon. They always kept one as a final insurance policy. The overseer raised the weapon, aiming directly at its heart. If we cannot have you as a resource, then you will die as you should have decades ago. He fired. The weapon's energy beam lanced across the docking bay, carrying enough concentrated power to punch through a battleship's shields. It struck directly in the chest, and for a moment Sarah thought all their efforts had been in vain. Then the beam simply stopped, absorbed harmlessly by scales that had been tempered by 47 years of pain and torture. Looked down at the point of impact, where her scales showed no damage at all. Did you think, she said conversationally, that after enduring your tender mercies for nearly 5 decades, a mere weapon would be sufficient to stop me? She breathed fire once more, and Overseer K simply ceased to exist. The escape from the facility was a thing of legend. 8 dragons flying through space like living starships, their scales shimmering with internal fire as they escorted a small human inspection vessel away from the scene of their long captivity. Behind them, the mining station burned with dragon fire, its automated distress signals broadcasting evidence of the atrocities that had been committed there. Sarah's emergency beacon had worked better than she'd hoped. By the time they cleared the system, 3 different news organizations had picked up the signal and were broadcasting the story across the galaxy. The carefully hidden genocide was hidden no longer. But more importantly, as they flew toward the rim worlds and the unknown territories beyond, Sarah realized she had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The moment when an entire species chose to trust a human with their survival. "Where will you go?" Sarah asked over the communication system as they approached the edge of Council space. "To places humans have not yet discovered," replied. "To worlds where dragons can be dragons without asking permission from species barely old enough to understand fire. We will rebuild, Sarah, we will remember. And perhaps someday, when the galaxy has learned wisdom, we will return." "And if they try to hunt you down?" His laugh was like music made of starlight and flame. "Let them try. They had one dragon, weakened and broken by torture, and it took them 47 years to contain her. Now there are 8 of us, free and angry and determined to ensure our species survives." Sarah watched from her ship's viewport as the dragons accelerated beyond what should have been possible, their forms becoming streaks of light against the cosmic dark. They were heading for freedom, for the chance to rebuild everything the galaxy had tried to destroy. As her ship turned back toward civilized space, Sarah began composing her report. The political firestorm would be unprecedented. The revelation that the Galactic Council had authorized genocide would shake the foundations of interstellar government. There would be investigations, trials, reforms. But most importantly, there would be change. Because sometimes one person standing up and saying, "No more," is all it takes to transform the galaxy. The dragons were free. The truth was out. And somewhere in the void between stars, a species was preparing to rise from the ashes of extinction to reclaim their rightful place among the cosmos. Sarah smiled as she began her journey home. She had a galaxy to wake up.